I knew something was wrong the moment Nathan Spencer walked past my desk without his usual smirk. Normally he'd hover near the audit team at 8:45 a.m., clipboard in hand, hunting for anyone who dared look relaxed. But that Tuesday he marched down the hall like a man with a mission. I worked in federal compliance, handling grant documentation where one wrong timestamp could cost millions or trigger a federal audit. 6 years at Crestline. Never missed a deadline. Always exceeds expectations, though my raises never showed it. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. At 9:14 a.m. my phone buzzed. From HR Nathan Spencer. Subject: immediate termination notice. The PDF opened slowly. When it loaded, my stomach dropped. My badge photo filled the top half. Below in bold red: terminated for time left workplace 3 minutes early on Monday without authorization, not eligible for rehire under any circumstances. Sent to the entire company and external partners. 3 minutes. I pulled up my timesheet. Monday, November 4th. Clocked out at 4:57 p.m. We'd been told flexible departures were fine as long as we hit 40 hours. My manager, Gregory, had even said, "We're not running a prison." I called him. Voicemail. At 9:28 a.m., Nathan appeared at my cubicle. "Callie. My office. Now." His office smelled like leather cleaner and self-importance. He slid a paper across the desk. "Effective immediately." "You emailed this to everyone," I said. "Transparency," he replied, smug. "New policy. Violators get an audience." I left 3 minutes early. With implied approval. Gregory doesn't set policy. I do. Page 47 of the handbook. Unauthorized early departure equals time theft. I didn't raise my voice. "Then you should know. The federal grant reports you submitted yesterday still carry my digital signature." His smile flickered. "It will be relevant," I said, standing. Per 48 CFR 31.205, using a terminated employee's signature on federal documents is falsification. That's not HR, it's federal law. I walked out. Didn't look back. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed nonstop. 73 messages, unknown numbers. I ignored them all. At home, I made tea, opened my laptop, and logged into my personal email. I had copies of everything: reports, memos, authorizations. After 6 years in compliance, I knew. Companies protect themselves, not you. At 2:47 p.m. an email arrived. From Federal Technology Oversight Agency. Subject: urgent inquiry, grant ACG 7743. They'd flagged it. My ID was inactive, yet my name was still on live federal submissions. I drafted a reply, confirmed my termination time, attached Nathan's public shaming email, read time theft, and all, and hit send. No triumph. Just quiet certainty. They wanted accountability. Now they'd get it. By Wednesday I was office folklore. Rumors flew, she embezzled. She screamed at HR. She works for a competitor. None of it true. But truth rarely matters when people need a story. Apparently she was secretly working for a competitor. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when people need a story. I woke up early that day not because I had anywhere to be, but because my body was still programmed to start reviewing compliance documents at 6:30 a.m. The routine felt hollow now. No calendar alerts. No urgent emails. Just the quiet hum of my laptop and the bitter taste of instant coffee. I didn't plan to check my old work email. But when I did, I noticed something shocking. The login still worked. Nathan had deactivated my badge. Cut my payroll access. Sent my termination notice to the world. But he hadn't revoked my access to the federal compliance database. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously Crestline took its own protocols. At 8:53 a.m., I logged into the system and ran a standard query. Grant ACG 7743, Advanced Communications Infrastructure Certification Records. The access log showed something that made my blood run cold. The documents had been re-uploaded Tuesday evening at 6:22 p.m., more than 9 hours after my termination. My name was still listed as the primary certifying officer. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the submission had been flagged by the federal system at 7:15 p.m. with a priority code. Audit required. That meant federal investigators were already involved. Not just a routine inquiry. An actual audit. I sat back, staring at the screen, trying to calculate the scope of what I was seeing. If the federal system had detected the discrepancy and escalated it to an audit, someone from the government would be contacting Crestline directly. Probably today. Maybe within hours. And Nathan had no idea. At 10:37 a.m., I received a forwarded email from someone still inside the company. It was from Gregory, my former supervisor, sent to the entire compliance department. Emergency meeting at 11 a.m. All hands required. Federal liaison will be visiting the office tomorrow. Please ensure all project files are organized and accessible. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. They were panicking. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Nathan's smug face, the way he'd smiled when he handed me that termination notice like he was doing the world a favor. The way he'd called it transparency, while destroying my reputation in front of everyone I'd worked with for 6 years. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too hot, too chaotic. What I felt now was colder. Sharper. Focused. The next morning at 9:04 a.m., the federal liaison arrived at Crestline Technologies. I wasn't there to see it, but I would hear every detail later from multiple sources. People who'd been in the room. People who watched it unfold like a slow-motion disaster. The man's name was Agent Elliot Cross, and he arrived in a plain gray suit with a black leather briefcase and an expression that gave away nothing. He didn't smile. Didn't make small talk. Just introduced himself to the receptionist and asked to speak with the compliance director. Within minutes, Nathan was summoned. So was the company's operations director, a man named Philip Grayson who spent most of his time golfing with clients and taking credit for other people's work. The company's legal counsel, an overconfident attorney named Warren Little, joined them in the main conference room. According to someone who worked in the adjacent office, the meeting started cordially enough. Philip tried his usual corporate charm routine, offering coffee, making jokes about government bureaucracy. Nathan sat with perfect posture, his HR manual open in front of him like a security blanket. Agent Cross didn't touch the coffee. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on the table. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I'm here regarding Grant I-7743. Specifically, the certification documents submitted on November 5th. Nathan nodded confidently. "Yes, we submitted those on schedule. Everything was handled properly." Agent Cross opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is the submission record. The certifying officer listed is Callie Franklin. Can you confirm she was an active employee at the time of submission?" There was a pause. A brief, telling silence. "She was not," Nathan said carefully. "Miss Franklin was terminated that morning for policy violations. But the documents themselves were prepared beforehand." Agent Cross looked up, his expression unchanged. "The submission timestamp shows 6:22 p.m. on November 5th. Miss Franklin's termination notice indicates she was terminated at 9:14 a.m. that same day. That's a 9-hour gap." The room went quiet. "According to my source, you could hear the air conditioning humming." Philip cleared his throat. "There must have been a delay in the system. Our IT department sometimes." "Your IT logs show manual upload," Agent Cross interrupted, pulling out another document. "Someone with administrative access resubmitted these files after business hours." Warren, the lawyer, leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual confidence to genuine concern. "Who uploaded them?" Agent Cross turned the page. "The access log shows Nathan Spencer, HR director, submitted the files at 6:22 p.m. using Callie Franklin's digital signature credential." Every eye in the room turned to Nathan. His face went pale. "I was just cleaning up loose ends. The documents were already complete. I didn't think." "You didn't think it mattered that you used a terminated employee's credentials on a federal contract?" Agent Cross's tone remained perfectly even, which somehow made the words hit harder. "Using the digital signature of an inactive employee on federal documentation constitutes falsification under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. That's a federal crime." The silence that followed was suffocating. Warren stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We need to consult with upper management before continuing this conversation. Agent Cross closed his folder calmly. You're welcome to do that. But I should inform you that as of this morning, all federal contracts associated with Crestline Technologies have been flagged for review. Your funding will be frozen pending investigation. Philip's voice cracked. Frozen? For how long? Until the investigation is complete. Could be weeks. Could be months. Agent Cross stood up, straightening his jacket. You'll receive formal documentation by end of business today. He left his business card on the table and walked out without shaking anyone's hand. According to my source, the moment the door closed behind him, Warren turned to Nathan and said 5 words that would echo through the company for weeks. You just destroyed this company. By Thursday afternoon, the news had spread through Crestline like wildfire. People who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanted to talk. My phone filled with messages. Callie, did you know about the audit? Is it true they used your signature after firing you? Nathan's freaking out. He's been in closed-door meetings all day. I didn't respond to most of them, but one message caught my attention. It was from Lydia, the woman from accounting who'd mouthed, "I'm sorry," when I left. They're blaming you. Nathan told the executive team you sabotaged the system before you left. Thought you should know. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Of course they were blaming me. That's what people like Nathan did. When their incompetence created consequences, they found someone else to pin it on. But this time they'd picked the wrong person. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Agent Cross. Dear Agent Cross, I've become aware that Crestline Technologies may be making false statements regarding the circumstances of my termination and the subsequent use of my credentials. I have documentation that may be relevant to your investigation, including internal communications, termination records, and access logs. I'm happy to provide these materials if they would be helpful. I attached everything. The termination email with my photo. The company policy on flexible hours. The access logs showing Nathan's late-night upload. The email chain where Gregory had explicitly approved flexible departure times. Then I sent it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. But somewhere beneath that exhaustion was something else. Something quiet and steady. The knowledge that truth, properly documented, is more powerful than any lie. Friday morning arrived with unexpected silence. No frantic messages. No calls. Just an eerie calm that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. At 10:22 a.m., I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Callie, it's Lydia. I'm using my personal email because I don't trust the company system anymore. You need to know what happened this morning. Agent Cross came back with 2 other investigators. They spent 3 hours reviewing every document related to the grant. They interviewed Nathan. They interviewed Philip. They pulled server logs. And then they left with boxes of files. Nathan was escorted out of the building by security an hour ago. They're saying he's been suspended pending investigation. The whole office is in chaos. I read the email 3 times trying to process what it meant. Nathan was gone. The man who'd humiliated me, who'd sent my photo to hundreds of people with the label "time theft" in red letters, who'd destroyed my reputation over 3 minutes, was now facing the consequences of his own actions. I should have felt satisfaction. Victory. Some kind of emotional catharsis. Instead, I just felt empty. At 2:15 p.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Miss Franklin. The voice was formal, measured. This is Agent Elliot Cross with the Federal Technology Oversight Agency. Do you have a moment to speak? My heart started pounding. Yes. I want to thank you for the documentation you provided. It's been extremely helpful in our investigation. I also want to inform you that you are not under investigation, nor are you suspected of any wrongdoing. Your record with the federal compliance system is exemplary. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Thank you. I'm calling because we'd like to ask if you'd be willing to serve as a consulting witness. Your expertise in federal grant compliance would be valuable as we review Crestline's practices. It would be compensated, of course. I blinked, staring at the wall of my apartment. Consulting witness? Yes. We need someone who understands the technical requirements and can verify whether proper procedures were followed. Given your 6 years of experience with these specific grants, you're uniquely qualified. For a moment I couldn't speak. They were asking me to help investigate the company that had just fired me. To use my expertise against the people who'd tried to destroy my reputation. I'd be happy to help, I said quietly. Excellent. I'll send over the formal paperwork. We'll be in touch early next week. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, falling across the table where I'd spent so many mornings reviewing reports before work. They'd fired me over 3 minutes, called it time theft, humiliated me in front of everyone. And now they were paying me to expose every mistake they'd ever made. The following Monday, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. Inside was a formal contract from the Federal Technology Oversight Agency, offering a consulting rate 3 times what Crestline had paid me annually. I signed it immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, I spent my days reviewing documents, providing technical analysis, and explaining to federal investigators exactly how Crestline's compliance systems worked and where they'd failed. The investigation revealed things even I hadn't known. Nathan had been cutting corners for months, rushing submissions to meet deadlines without proper review. He'd used automated signatures without authorization on at least 7 different federal contracts. He'd falsified training records to make it appear that employees had completed required compliance courses they'd never taken. The house of cards had been teetering for months. I was just the final nudge that made it collapse. By the end of November, Crestline Technologies lost every federal contract they held. The company hemorrhaged clients. Half the staff was laid off. Philip Grayson resigned. Warren Little, the lawyer, was named in a separate ethics investigation. And Nathan Spencer was facing federal charges. I heard all of this through the quiet network of former colleagues who'd stayed in touch. Some of them were angry at me, blamed me for the collapse. Others understood that I hadn't created the problems. I just documented them. On a cold December morning, I received one final email from Agent Cross. Miss Franklin, the investigation has concluded. Crestline Technologies will be barred from federal contracts for a minimum of 5 years. Multiple individuals are facing legal consequences. Your assistance has been invaluable. I wanted to personally thank you for your professionalism throughout this process. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss an opportunity with our agency. We're looking for experienced compliance officers to join our oversight team. The work is challenging but rewarding. And we value integrity. Let me know if you'd like to talk. I read it twice, then looked around my small apartment. At the stacks of documents. At the quiet life I'd built in the aftermath of chaos. Then I hit reply. Agent Cross, I'd very much like to discuss that opportunity. Thank you for thinking of me. 3 weeks later, I started my new position as a federal compliance investigator. My job was to review grant applications, audit company practices, and ensure that federal money was being used properly. The work was demanding. The hours were long. But for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I was part of something that actually valued the rules I'd spent my career enforcing. On my first day as I was setting up my new office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Callie, it's Gregory. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have questioned Nathan's decision. I was too afraid of losing my job, and because of that you lost yours. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. Gregory, I appreciate that. Take care of yourself. I didn't need his apology. It didn't erase what happened. But it was something. A small acknowledgement that not everyone had been complicit. Some people had just been scared. That evening I stood by my office window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nathan Spencer was preparing for a trial that would likely end his career. Crestline Technologies was scrambling to survive without federal funding. Philip Grayson was probably on a golf course somewhere, pretending none of this was his fault. And I was here, starting over. Building something new from the wreckage of something I'd spent 6 years creating. They fired me for leaving 3 minutes early. But in those 3 minutes, in that tiny act of alleged rebellion, they revealed everything that was wrong with themselves. I didn't destroy Crestline Technologies. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure someone was paying attention when they did. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper. Callie, you don't know me, but I worked in the IT department at Crestline. I was one of the people laid off after everything collapsed. I wanted to write to you because I've been carrying guilt for months. I knew what Nathan was doing. I saw him using automated signatures. I saw him backdating documents. I even warned our supervisor once, but nothing happened. When you got fired, I thought about speaking up, but I was scared. I had a mortgage. Kids. I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. After everything fell apart, I realized something. Silence is complicity. You weren't silent and it cost you everything. But because you weren't silent, the truth came out. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. It mattered to people like me who were too afraid to do it ourselves. Thank you. A former colleague. I read the letter 3 times, feeling something warm and unexpected bloom in my chest. I'd spent months telling myself I hadn't wanted revenge, that I'd only wanted truth. But part of me had wondered if that was just rationalization. If deep down I'd wanted to hurt the people who'd hurt me. This letter reminded me why it actually mattered. Not because Nathan got what he deserved, though he did. Not because Crestline collapsed, though they'd built their success on shortcuts and lies. But because somewhere in the rubble, people who'd been too afraid to speak up finally saw that silence had a cost too. That evening, I framed the letter and hung it on my office wall, right next to my federal credentials. 2 artifacts of the same story. One about what happens when good people stay silent. One about what happens when someone finally speaks. A year after my termination, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, reviewing case files for an upcoming investigation. The work had become my new normal. Long hours, complex documents, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere, because of the work I did, a company couldn't cut corners at taxpayer expense. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Someone had endorsed me for federal compliance and regulatory oversight. I clicked on the profile, curious who it was. Lydia Chen. The woman from accounting. Her profile showed she'd left Crestline 6 months ago and was now working for a nonprofit focused on corporate accountability. I sent her a quick message. Hey Lydia. Hope you're doing well. Love what you're doing at the nonprofit. Her reply came within minutes. Callie. I've been meaning to reach out. What happened to you changed something for me. I realized I'd spent years watching people get mistreated and telling myself it wasn't my problem. After everything with Nathan and the investigation, I couldn't do it anymore. This job pays less, but I sleep better at night. How are you? We ended up meeting for coffee the following week. She told me stories about the aftermath at Crestline, about how the culture had shifted after the scandal, about the employees who'd banded together to demand better treatment. You became a legend, she said with a slight smile. People talk about you like you're some kind of compliance vigilante. I laughed. I'm really not. I just documented what was already there. That's the point, she said. Most people don't. They see problems and convince themselves it's not worth the risk to report them. You showed people that documentation matters. That speaking up matters. Even when it costs you. As I drove home that evening, I thought about her words. About how strange it was that my lowest moment had somehow become a turning point not just for me, but for other people I'd never even met. 2 years after my termination, the legal proceedings finally concluded. Nathan Spencer pled guilty to falsification of federal records and received a suspended sentence with probation and a permanent ban from working on any federal contracts. Crestline Technologies paid a substantial fine and agreed to implement comprehensive compliance reforms. I received a formal letter from the court, thanking me for my cooperation in the investigation. It was signed by a federal judge I'd never met. That same week, I was promoted to senior compliance investigator. My new role involved training other investigators, developing audit protocols, and testifying in federal cases when needed. At my promotion ceremony, a small affair in a government conference room with cheap coffee and supermarket cake, Agent Cross gave a short speech. Callie Franklin represents everything this agency values. Precision, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs her personally. She didn't ask to become part of this investigation. But when she was forced to make a choice between her reputation and the truth, she chose truth. That's the kind of person we need in this work. After the ceremony, as people mingled and made awkward small talk, a young woman approached me. She looked fresh out of college, nervous and eager. Miss Franklin? Emma. I just started as a junior investigator. I read about your case in my training materials. It's actually part of the curriculum now. They use it as an example of how to document potential violations. I felt something shift in my chest. My case was being taught. My documentation was being used as a model. That's unexpected, I said. It's inspiring, Emma said earnestly. They told us that compliance work isn't glamorous, but it matters. That one person with the right documentation at the right time can stop systemic fraud. You proved that. After she walked away, I stood alone for a moment looking out the window at the city below. They'd fired me for leaving 3 minutes early. But those 3 minutes had led to this. To a career that mattered. To a case study that would teach future investigators. To a story that reminded people that rules exist for reasons, and when powerful people break them, documentation is the only weapon that works. 3 years after my termination, I received an unexpected email. From Gregory.Patterson@techventures.com. Subject: Apology and Update. Callie, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to reach out. I left Crestline about a year ago. Couldn't stay after everything that happened. I took a position at a smaller company where I'm trying to do things differently. I've been thinking a lot about what happened to you, about how I failed you as a supervisor. I should have fought harder. Should have questioned Nathan. Should have documented his pattern of behavior. I didn't, and that failure led to your termination. I can't change that. But I wanted you to know that I've spent the last 3 years trying to be the kind of manager who would have protected you. I require written authorization for everything. I document every policy discussion. I stand up for my team even when it's uncomfortable. I do this because I failed you and I never want to fail someone that way again. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what happened to you changed me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Gregory. I read the email twice, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at how long it had taken him to find his spine. Sadness for the person I'd been 3 years ago, desperately hoping someone would stand up for me. And something else. Something that felt almost like peace. I typed a reply. Gregory, thank you for reaching out. I won't pretend it doesn't still hurt to think about how alone I felt that day. But I appreciate that you've learned from it. That's all any of us can do, learn and do better. I hope your team knows how lucky they are to have a manager who's learned these lessons. Take care. Callie. After I hit send, I closed my laptop and looked around my new apartment. Bigger than the old one. Better view. Filled with furniture I'd actually chosen instead of accepting hand-me-downs. On my wall hung 3 framed documents. My federal credentials. The anonymous letter from the IT worker. And a screenshot of an article from a compliance journal titled, The Crestline Case. How one investigator's documentation exposed systemic fraud. 3 artifacts that told the story of who I'd become. Not a victim. Not a vigilante. Just someone who understood that in a world full of people willing to cut corners and silence critics, the simple act of documenting truth is revolutionary. 5 years after my termination, I was invited to speak at a federal compliance conference. The invitation came from Agent Cross, who'd been promoted to regional director. Callie, we're hosting our annual conference in Washington next month. I'd like you to give the keynote. Your story has become something of a legend in our field, and I think people would benefit from hearing it directly from you. I almost said no. Public speaking terrified me. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and reliving the worst day of my professional life felt overwhelming. But then I thought about Emma, the young investigator who'd told me my case was part of her training. I thought about the letter from the IT worker who'd been too afraid to speak up. I thought about all the people still sitting in offices right now watching injustice happen and wondering if speaking up was worth the risk. I'll do it, I told Agent Cross. The conference was held in a massive hotel ballroom, the kind with chandeliers and carpet that swallowed sound. As I stood backstage waiting to go on, my hands shook. I'd given presentations before, but never anything like this. Agent Cross introduced me with words I barely heard over my own heartbeat. Then I walked out onto the stage, stood behind the podium and looked out at 300 faces. I took a breath and began. 5 years ago I was fired for leaving work 3 minutes early. My photo was sent to hundreds of people with the label, time theft. My reputation was destroyed. My career was over. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that in firing me so carelessly, my former employer had triggered a chain of events that would lead to a federal investigation, multiple criminal charges, and a complete restructuring of their compliance systems. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted truth. And the only weapon I had was documentation. I spoke for 40 minutes about the importance of keeping records, about how companies rely on employees being too afraid to speak up, about how one person with the right documentation at the right time can change everything. When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then applause filled the space, genuine and sustained. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. A woman who'd been retaliated against for reporting safety violations. A man who'd been demoted after questioning fraudulent billing practices. A young investigator who'd just started her career and wanted advice on how to handle pressure from powerful people. I listened to each of them, offered what guidance I could, and felt something profound settle over me. This was why it mattered. Not because Nathan got punished, though. Justice felt important. Not because Crestline collapsed, though accountability was necessary. But because my story had become permission for other people to believe that speaking up was possible. That documentation wasn't just bureaucratic busy work. It was power in its most accessible form. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those faces in the audience, all those stories of people who'd been silenced or pushed out or made to feel like they were crazy for caring about rules. At 2:17 a.m., I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a report. Not a case file. Just thoughts. 5 years ago, I thought my career was over. I thought being fired meant I'd failed. But failure and injustice aren't the same thing. Failure is when you make a mistake. Injustice is when someone else makes a mistake and blames you for it. The difference matters because failure requires you to change. Injustice requires the system to change. And the only way systems change is when someone documents what's wrong and refuses to let it be buried. I saved the document, titled it Lessons from 3 Minutes, and went to sleep. 3 months later, that document would become an article in a major compliance journal. 6 months after that, it would be cited in a congressional hearing about corporate accountability. A year later, it would be required reading for new federal investigators. But that night, I didn't know any of that. I just knew I'd survived something that was supposed to destroy me, and somehow, impossibly, I'd come out stronger. 7 years after my termination, I was offered a position as Director of Compliance Training for the entire Federal Oversight Agency. The job would mean relocating to Washington, leading a team of 20 investigators, and completely redesigning how the government trained its compliance officers. I accepted immediately. On my first day in the new role, I stood in front of my team, experienced investigators, most of them older than me, and felt the weight of imposter syndrome pressing down. I know some of you are wondering why someone who got fired from a mid-level corporate job is now running this department. I began. The answer is simple. I learned something most people never have to learn. I learned what it feels like when the system you trust turns on you. When the rules you followed religiously are used as weapons against you. When documentation is the only thing standing between you and complete destruction. That experience taught me that compliance work isn't about enforcing rules for the sake of rules. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's about making sure the powerful can't hide behind paperwork while the powerless suffer. And it's about creating systems where truth matters more than politics. One of the veteran investigators, a woman named Diane with 30 years of experience, raised her hand. What's the first thing you want to change about our training program? I didn't hesitate. I want every new investigator to understand that they're not just auditors. They're the last line of defense between institutional abuse and justice. And I want them to know that one person with integrity and good documentation can change everything. Over the next 2 years, we completely rebuilt the training curriculum. We added modules on recognizing retaliation. We taught investigators how to protect whistleblowers. We created secure systems for employees to report violations without fear of exposure. And we made the Crestline case, my case, the cornerstone example of why documentation matters. Every new investigator learned my name. Learn what happened. Learn that sometimes the most important investigations start with someone being punished for doing nothing wrong. 9 years after my termination, on a cold November morning that felt eerily similar to that day in 2025, I received an email that made me stop breathing. From Nathan Spencer, personal@gmail.com. Subject: I owe you an apology. My finger hovered over the delete button. I didn't need his apology. Didn't want it. Had spent years building a life that had nothing to do with him or his choices. But curiosity won. Callie, I don't expect you to read this, and I definitely don't expect a response. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take accountability for the harm I caused, and you're at the top of a very long list. What I did to you is cruel. I told myself I was enforcing policy, maintaining standards, protecting the company. But the truth is I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having power over people. I enjoyed making examples. I enjoyed being feared. When you questioned me that day in my office, when you mentioned the federal regulations, I saw the fear in my own reflection and I hated you for it. So I destroyed you. Or tried to. What I didn't understand then, what took years of therapy and legal consequences to learn, is that you can't destroy truth. You can suppress it, ignore it, attack the messenger. But eventually truth finds a way out. You were the truth I tried to bury and it cost me everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did. And I'm sorry. Nathan. I read the email 3 times. Felt anger rise, then fade, then settle into something that felt almost like pity. He'd lost everything. His career. His reputation. Probably relationships and opportunities I'd never know about. And he'd done it to himself. I closed the email without responding. Some apologies don't require acknowledgement. Some people need to sit with their guilt without the relief of absolution. 10 years after my termination, I was invited to testify before Congress about corporate accountability in federal oversight systems. The hearing was part of a larger investigation into how companies exploit loopholes in federal contracting. I sat at a table facing a panel of senators, cameras recording every word, knowing that whatever I said would become part of the permanent record. Senator Patricia Holloway, chair of the Oversight Committee, asked the question I'd been preparing for. Ms. Franklin, you've become something of an icon in the compliance world. Your case is taught in universities, cited in legal briefs, and referenced in corporate training programs. From your perspective, what's the single most important lesson organizations should learn from what happened to you? I took a moment thinking about all the years, all the people, all the stories that had led to this moment. Senator, the lesson isn't complicated. When you build a culture where people are afraid to speak up, where minor infractions are punished with public humiliation, where employees are treated as disposable, you create an environment where major violations can flourish. The company that fired me for leaving 3 minutes early was the same company committing federal fraud. That's not a coincidence. When you normalize cruelty in small ways, you normalize it in big ways too. The solution is equally simple. Treat documentation as sacred, treat employees as humans, and understand that transparency works both ways. If you're going to demand it from your workers, you'd better be prepared to provide it to them. The hearing room was silent for a beat, then Senator Holloway nodded slowly. That's a powerful statement, Miss Franklin. Thank you for your testimony. The video of that exchange would be viewed over 2 million times in the following week. It would be quoted in articles about corporate culture, worker rights, and federal accountability. But for me, the most meaningful moment came afterward in the hallway outside the hearing room. A young woman approached me, probably in her mid-20s, wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked borrowed. Miss Franklin, I'm sorry to bother you. I work for a government contractor. Last month, my supervisor told me to backdate some training certificates. I refused, and now they're building a case to fire me. I'm terrified. But I heard you speak just now and I realized something. I need to document everything. Every conversation. Every email. Every time they ask me to cut corners. Because if they fire me, I want the truth on record. I looked at her, seeing myself a decade ago, and felt something profound click into place. This was why it all mattered. What's your name? I asked. Jessica. Jessica Pruitt. Jessica, do you have a personal email address that's not connected to your work? She nodded. Give it to me. I'm going to send you a guide I wrote on documentation best practices. And I'm going to give you the contact information for 3 attorneys who specialize in whistleblower protection. You're not alone in this. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And remember that the truth, properly recorded, is more powerful than any threat they can make. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. But I did know. I knew exactly what it meant to feel alone, to feel targeted, to wonder if speaking up was worth losing everything. As I watched her walk away, clutching the paper with the attorney contacts, I thought about the long, strange journey from that November morning when Nathan Spencer handed me a termination notice to this moment, standing in the halls of Congress, helping someone else prepare for a fight I knew too well. 12 years after my termination, I published a book. It wasn't something I'd planned. A literary agent had reached out after seeing my congressional testimony, suggesting that my story deserved a fuller treatment. The book was titled 3 Minutes: How Documentation Became My Superpower. It combined my personal story with practical guidance on workplace documentation, recognizing retaliation, and protecting yourself in toxic corporate environments. It became a bestseller in the business and career category. I received thousands of emails from readers. Some were people who'd been through similar experiences. Others were managers who said the book made them reconsider how they treated their teams. A few were from HR professionals who admitted they'd been complicit in systems that punished employees unfairly and were trying to do better. One email stood out. It was from someone who identified themselves only as a former Crestline employee. "Callie, I worked at Crestline in a different department. I never met you. But I watched what happened to you from a distance and I was too afraid to say anything. After the company collapsed and I found a new job, I promised myself I'd never be silent again. Last year I reported a safety violation at my new company. They tried to retaliate. But I documented everything just like you taught people to do. I filed a complaint with OSHA, and the company was forced to implement safety reforms. 3 people told me afterward that those reforms probably saved their lives. I'm writing to say thank you. Not just for what you did but for teaching the rest of us how to do it too." I printed that email and added it to my office wall, right next to the letter from the IT worker and the screenshot of the Compliance Journal article. Evidence that what happened to me hadn't just changed my life. It had rippled outward, touching people I'd never meet in ways I'd never fully know. 15 years after my termination, on a gray November morning that felt like an echo of that original day, I woke up to an unexpected notification. Crestline Technologies, the company that had fired me, that had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, had filed for bankruptcy. The final remnant of what was once a thriving business was being dissolved, its assets sold off, its name erased from the industry. I sat with my coffee, reading the Business Journal article about the bankruptcy filing and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just a quiet sense of completion. The article mentioned me briefly. The company's troubles began 15 years ago when a federal audit was triggered following the controversial termination of compliance officer Callie Franklin. The subsequent investigation revealed systemic fraud that ultimately led to the loss of all federal contracts. My name was now permanently attached to their downfall. Not because I'd sought revenge but because I'd simply documented the truth. That afternoon, I received a call from Agent Elliot Cross. He'd retired from the agency 5 years earlier, but we'd stayed in touch. "Callie, did you see the news about Crestline?" "I did. How do you feel?" I thought about the question. Like closing a book I finished reading years ago. The ending doesn't surprise me anymore. He chuckled. "That's very zen of you. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another employee caught in a bad situation. I had no idea you'd become one of the most influential voices in federal compliance. I didn't plan any of this, Elliot. I just wanted my documentation to speak for itself. And it did. It spoke so loudly it changed an entire industry." After we hung up, I stood by my office window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, someone was being mistreated at work. Someone was watching fraud happen and wondering if speaking up was worth the risk. Someone was being told their documentation didn't matter. And maybe, if they'd read my book or heard my story or learned about the Crestline case, they'd remember that one person with integrity and good records can change everything. 20 years after my termination, I retired from federal service. I'd spent 2 decades training investigators, redesigning compliance systems, and teaching people that documentation is power. On my last day, my team threw a small reception. Nothing fancy. Coffee and cake in a conference room, the same way these things always went. But the speeches were different. Diane, the veteran investigator who'd questioned me on my first day as director, stood up with notes in her hand. 20 years ago, Callie stood in front of this team and told us we weren't just auditors. We were the last line of defense between institutional abuse and justice. Some of us thought it was naive. Corporate speak. The kind of thing people say to sound inspirational. But she meant it. Every policy she implemented, every training module she created, every investigator she mentored, it all came back to that core belief. That our job is to protect people who can't protect themselves. Because of her leadership, this agency has prevented millions of dollars in fraud, protected countless whistleblowers, and changed how the federal government approaches compliance. But more than that, she changed us. She taught us that the work we do isn't just about checking boxes. It's about human dignity. And that's a legacy that will outlive any of us. As people applauded, I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I'd spent 20 years trying to make sure what happened to me couldn't happen to others. And maybe in some small way I'd succeeded. After the reception, as I was packing up my office, I found an old folder buried in my desk drawer. Inside was a printed copy of that email Nathan Spencer had sent to the entire company 20 years ago. My badge photo. The red letters spelling out "terminated for time theft." I stared at it for a long moment, remembering the woman I'd been when I first saw it. Humiliated. Certain her career was over. If I could go back and tell her what would happen next, the investigation, the career, the congressional testimony, the book, the lives changed, she wouldn't believe me. But she'd survived it anyway. I put the printed email in my bag along with the framed documents from my wall. Not as reminders of trauma, but as evidence of transformation. Then I turned off the lights in my office for the last time and walked out into the afternoon sun. The book. 25 years after my termination, I was invited back to the agency for a special ceremony. They were naming their new training facility the Callie Franklin Center for Compliance Excellence. I stood in front of the building, looking up at the bronze plaque with my name on it, and felt the surreal weight of legacy. Inside, current investigators gave presentations on cases they'd worked, reforms they'd implemented, people they'd protected. Every single one referenced techniques I'd taught or principles I'd championed. During the dedication ceremony, the current director, a young woman who'd been a junior investigator when I retired, spoke about what the building represented. This facility stands for a simple truth. That one person with integrity can change everything. That documentation is power. That speaking up matters. Callie Franklin didn't just survive injustice. She transformed it into a blueprint for protecting others. This building will train thousands of investigators over the coming decades. And every single one of them will learn her story. Will understand that compliance work isn't about rules for the sake of rules. It's about making sure the powerful can't hide behind paperwork while the powerless suffer. As I listened, I thought about Nathan Spencer, about that November morning 25 years ago, about the moment he handed me that termination notice with such smug certainty. He'd thought he was ending my career. Instead, he'd launched it. After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated me, a young investigator approached. She couldn't have been more than 25, fresh out of graduate school, eyes bright with idealism that hadn't been beaten down yet. "Miss Franklin, I just started last month. Your case was the first thing they taught us in training. I wanted you to know, it's the reason I applied for this job. I read your book in college and realized that compliance work could actually change lives. So thank you for showing people like me that this work matters." I looked at her, seeing myself at that age, and smiled. "It does matter," I said. "And now it's your turn to prove it." As she walked away, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Peace. Completion. The knowledge that what started as the worst day of my professional life had somehow transformed into the most important. They fired me for leaving 3 minutes early. But in those 3 minutes, in that tiny window of supposed misconduct, they'd accidentally revealed the truth about themselves. And I'd spent 25 years making sure that truth echoed long after they'd disappeared. The